everybody. Welcome to today's event, From Disarray to Discipline, What's Next for the Democrats, brought to you by the University of Chicago Institute of Politics and the Cook Political Report. I'm Jennifer Steinhauer, Senior Director at the Institute of Politics, and it's great to see all of you in the room here today. Today's program is going to be about 40 minutes of conversation, followed by 20 minutes of audience Q&A. To ask a question, please use the Q&A function, and you may be asked if you would like to ask your question live on the screen. You'll have that option. Before we begin this discussion today, if you are not already a subscriber to the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, you should be. It's the best way to stay up with analysis of what matters most. Right now, Amy and her team are offering a special election pass for $99, which features all of their crucial analysis from now until Election Day. If, however, you want to follow the shape of the 2026 elections from the start of the new Congress and have access to briefings like this with Amy and the team, I recommend the annual subscription. Follow the link following this webinar, and you can also go to cookpoliticalreport.com/subscribe. Okay, thank you for joining us. We have in the room today our founder, David Axelrod, and Amy Walter. Hi to both of you. Let's dig in right now with some of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, starting with the bottom of the ticket. Obviously, everyone's very excited to see who is at the bottom of this Harris ticket. How important is this compared to other cycles? How much stock do you put into the notion of the geography of this person, the ethnicity, the gender, all of this? How important is it to this specific race?
Well, I can start, and then obviously I'm going to throw it to David. You know, I start with this, two observations. The first is we have a candidate for president who is well known in terms of her name identification, but she's not really very well defined. I don't know that a lot of people have much of a perception of her. Partisans do, but beyond that, it's very sort of, it's not very sticky. So I do think this, you know, normally when we're talking about who a candidate will pick for vice president, we talk about, all right, well, what are the obvious strengths and weaknesses of this candidate? We've seen those strengths and weaknesses throughout the course of the primary campaign or their tenure as president. And now we're going to, you know, shift here and think about what that vice president will bring to the ticket. Obviously, we're not in that place today because we think we know what perceptions are of Kamala Harris. But again, we haven't really dug into those yet. Even polling taken pre-Sunday, I'm taking with a sort of a big grain of salt. It's not that it doesn't matter, but again, that was theoretical, this idea of her as a presidential candidate. We asked voters, like, what do you think? She's running for president. You know, most people were like, okay, sure, that's an interesting thought exercise. Now it's the real deal. So curious to see where we go there. My other observation is, you know, it is quite remarkable what has happened in these last, I don't know, 10 to 12 days, or actually maybe let's go all the way back to June 27th, which also wasn't that long ago. How much big stuff has happened, from the debate to the assassination attempt to Biden stepping down. And I think what you will notice in polls that are going to start coming out over the weekend, and a couple have already come out this week, is that the numbers don't move all that much. We aren't in an era anymore where even big events like an assassination attempt move numbers. So this is all about playing to the margins. Now, I will say just our assumptions about Harris and where she will be strong and where she has weaknesses, the assumption, and I think it's pretty a fair one, she'll be stronger with younger voters, stronger with voters of color, stronger with women. That's not where she's going to really need to have some help on the ticket. It is going to be with men, especially. I think the white men that powered Biden's win in 2020, for all the talk about, you know, how well Democrats did and how well Biden did in those new diverse new to the Electoral College, but the diversifying states of Arizona and Georgia, you still got to win in the upper Midwest, where white voters are making up 80+% of the electorate. So it's not just that it's a guy on the ticket who's a white male, but also somebody who can move on the margins. And to me, again, what do I know? But that's why the Josh Shapiro I like, in terms of not just that he's a popular governor of Pennsylvania, but he has outperformed national Democrats consistently, whether it was running as a governor or running as attorney general. So that is important. He can go to places where Harris may not be as popular. And for the Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, what I like about what he would bring to the table, it's kind of what Trump put up with his RNC event. You know, Trump went all macho, especially that last night with Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan and the UFC guy, right? It was definitely all in on the macho thing. Mark Kelly is one of those guys who can also do the macho thing. The dude's an astronaut. If you watched any of his ads during his last campaign, they had him either on his motorcycle or in a black t-shirt on his motorcycle. He has that like man's man thing, but also has been very comfortable talking about and being around women, including the fact that his mom was a police officer, who his wife is, who is a former congresswoman, who of course also suffered from an attack and from gun violence. So I like it more for who he is than for where he represents. But that's where I sort of start. Hold on, Jen, you're muted.
So sorry, this is 2024. I want to go back to the younger voters and moderate thing at some point, Amy, but David, can you weigh in?
Yeah, look, this pop-up discussion is called From Disarray to Discipline. That sounds kind of aspirational to me. I think Democrats are in a better position than they were 3 days ago, for sure. They went from almost a non-existent chance to win to the possibility of winning. And one of the reasons is because the Democratic-based voters who had been disillusioned and sort of walked away are now coming back. And so that's one thing that, at least in the early going, that Kamala Harris has accomplished. There's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of energy, and like younger voters, some voters of color who were sort of disillusioned or disinterested have come back. And that gets you back to sort of baseline. As Amy said, you know, the battle is among moderate white and independent voters, and whether she can get her share of those. And she has work to do, and you can see that the Republicans are trying to interdict that. There was a brutal video that Dave McCormick, the Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, put out, I guess today, that took a lot of her quotes from the video of her from the 2019 campaign. She didn't make it to 2020. It was a 2019 campaign to paint her very far to the left. And I think Kamala Harris has been tremendous in her first intervention since she was named. Confident, calm, relaxed, comfortable with herself in a way we never saw in 2019, and in a way that we didn't see really at the beginning of the administration. And the growth in her is really remarkable. And she seemed like a commanding candidate in these, and I think the language they've used, the way she's used her record of contrast with Trump has been really, really encouraging from a Democratic standpoint. but there's a lot of work to do. And part of it is, as Amy said, to make sure that she defines herself in terms that are authentic and helpful, and not allow them to draw a caricature of her, which they will do. That this is an opportunity for both her and for the Trump campaign, this lack of definition. So they're in a race to do that. One of the things that will help define her is this choice of a vice president. And so it really is, maybe more important than would typically be the case, because she's introducing herself and she'll be introducing a vice president in almost the same time frame. And that will be so that puts added weight on it. And it's not for nothing that she's mostly considering white moderate men. I agree with Amy that there are two theories of thought here. They both point to two people, Shapiro and Kelly. There is a strong belief, I think, among both parties, even though she may make the possibilities in the Sun Belt a little more than Biden could, that the race still ultimately will necessitate that Democrats win Pennsylvania in order to win, and that Republicans can block Democrats by winning Pennsylvania. And that, Josh Shapiro is a very talented politician, really great communicator, energetic, and someone who has shown an ability to break through with some of those voters who Democrats have had a hard time speaking to in rural areas and small towns. And so there's some logic behind him, because he's probably the person more than any other who could help her carry Pennsylvania, which is so important. And he could be very helpful beyond that. And I'll get back to one question about him in a second. The other, and Kelly, he is a former fighter pilot, astronaut. The saga of his valiant wife and their journey together is well known. He's a moderate who has a strong position on the border, coming from a border state, and can talk about immigration with some authority. He is an expert on national security, and knows more than J.D. Vance, certainly, and certainly Donald Trump about that. And, I think that's helpful. And as, Amy said, he's an alpha guy. So I think those two candidates would be by far and away the front runners. I don't think that Governor Cooper is going to be in this mix, because I think he wants to run for the Senate in 2 years in North Carolina. Not vice president right now. And if he left the state under the constitution of the state, Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor, would have full authority to act. And I don't think he wants to turn the state over to Robinson, who's running for the Senate at this time, and could use it as a theater for his own antics. Governor Beshear is also on that list, a little less tested than the others. Red state governor, very appealing on television. This is a very deep pool you're throwing people into, though. And, Kentucky is not a very big state. So that would be, I'd have questions about that. If he were running in a primary for president, for example, he'd be tested and he could grow, so you have to be pretty sure that the person you throw into the deep end of the pool can swim. I would think Kelly, my feeling is, if you've been a fighter pilot and an astronaut and you've gone through what you've gone through with your wife, you've been stress tested in a big way. So we'll see. But, I think people should avoid, if you are rooting for Democrats, irrational exuberance at this moment. This is still she comes in a deep hole that was dug partially, because of the circumstances surrounding the president. But I'll tell you this, having been in Milwaukee, and, you guys were there, there was this, it had the feeling of a victory party last week. And that seems like a distant memory now. Now it's a fight. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here.
Can I
Yeah,
read
I totally agree with that. And also, David, what I'm picking up, and for those of you sitting in Chicago, I was talking to folks sort of in the government relations lobbying space yesterday. And, you know, a lot of those folks, they weren't going to Chicago because they thought this is going to be the most depressing non-event ever. And now folks are scrambling to get credentials, right? It really revived that entire event. And so,
and by the way, you know, she's had a honeymoon period, as Tony Fabrizio, the pollster for Donald Trump, said she would. And the question is, how long will it last? Well, she gets to pick a vice president in the next, and she's going to do that probably before August 7th. And then they roll into the convention. And so, you know, they may pummel her in the media. And I think that they need to be prepared for that. One of the questions is, are they organized properly for that at this juncture? But, you know, there's a lot of opportunity from now until the end of the convention for her to define herself through her appointment and the convention itself, which is a storytelling exercise. Stephanie Cutter, our board member and old friend, is running this convention, planning it as she did the last one. I think the 2020 convention, and I say this as someone who was involved in planning conventions, was maybe the best I've ever seen. And it was it was virtual because by necessity, and they just did a brilliant job of setting Biden up for the fall. Big opportunity for Democrats now. And as Amy said, you know, what would have been a moribund event is now one that people are looking forward to with great anticipation.
I want to go back to the convention in a second, but can I just tie some of the threads that both of you have put out here in terms of what Harris needs to do now, especially in the demographic and regional components that you mentioned? How does she thread that needle? Amy, you mentioned younger voters. And the excitement around her for now. There's plenty of ways for her to disillusion that group, even though we know that's not the hugest voting bloc. And we're talking about the need to bring more moderates either back or in to the fold. And then she's also obviously tethered with the dynamics and the decisions of the Biden presidency. What are some of can you guys kind of walk through how she threads all those different needles over the, you know, what is obviously a very truncated period? I don't know if there's anything to be learned at all from what's happened in Europe and those shortened, you know, what Labor did and what was happening with the snap elections in France. I don't know if there's any themes set there, but how does she do all that in this very small period of time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And look, I'm no European voting expert. So for those on the call who are, I'm very sorry to if I'm absolutely getting this wrong or overstating this. I apologize. But to me, the one thing that feels familiar about this from the shortened, let's say the snap election in France, is that what Macron was betting was that there was a bigger coalition of, you know, anti-Le Pen voters in the country than there were pro-Le Pen. And that has always been the logic of the Biden-Harris campaign, right? That this had to be a race that was as much about Trump as it was about Biden/Biden-Harris administration. And that fundamentally there is a large anti-Trump coalition, a larger anti-Trump coalition than there is a pro-Trump coalition in the states that matter. So those blue wall states, those Sun Belt states, and that coalition has showed up in presidential years and in off years, right? They showed up in Michigan and in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Arizona and even Georgia in those Senate races in 2022 and obviously in 2018 in the midterm elections. So this is the theory of the case, and that what part of the reason Democrats are excited, and I think David said it correctly, it went from being, you know, think about it, if it's like a soccer game, the ball wasn't even in the stadium when Biden was at the top of the ticket. At least the ball's back on the field. So the question now is what she does with it and what the Democrats do with it. So being able to pivot back to, and that's really what she did the other day when she made sort of her first official comments at the new now Harris headquarters, the old Biden campaign headquarters in Wilmington, where she talks about she's prosecuting the case against Trump. That's, the fact that she was able to succinctly make that message and powerfully make that message, I think is also what got Democrats really excited. But, and this is what David and I also agree on, whether she can deliver the message, I think, yes, that is certainly much better than Biden did. How credible is she as a messenger? That is the real thing that I think will be tested. And I guess what I'm a little bit surprised about, and I'm curious to hear David's remarks on this, knowing how ill-defined she is, even among many Democrats, I guess I'm surprised that outside groups, super PACs, or the Biden-Harris campaign have not gone up earlier. Maybe they will, maybe we'll see it soon, trying to both defend against these attacks that we know are coming, and we've already seen some of them go up, attacking her for her liberal positions in 2019 and as an office holder when she was in California, but also, the job she had as vice president, especially on the border. So I guess I'm expecting those to go up soon. She's getting great earned media from sort of traditional mainstream media sources. But I bet if I were to, flip around, whether it is on actual broadcast, cable, or, within the digital sphere, I don't know how robust of a defense and offense they have.
Mhm.
Do you agree, David, or are you?
Yeah. And listen, I think that you asked about Jen. You asked about the compactness of the campaign. The challenge is you're basically building a plane in mid-flight here, and as there's incoming coming. I mean, there are challenges for the Trump campaign because their whole campaign was optimized to face Joe Biden's. So it was all about age and ability. I mean, there were issues underneath it, but their fundamental message was the world's out of control. Biden's not in command. He's weak. Trump is strong. Vote for Trump. That was their whole campaign. Now Trump's the old man in the race. He's the guy who he's the guy who sometimes looks addled and about whom people have, some real doubts for a whole range of reasons that I don't need to repeat. But they have a mature operation that has proven itself to be pretty proficient. Chris LaCivita, who's, one of the two co-pilots of the campaign, is a master at negative media, dating back was the guy who did the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth campaign against John Kerry in 2004. So he knows how to carve people up, and that's going to happen in short order. So the question is, does the Harris campaign, their strategist, Mike Donilon was the kind of singular message strategist for the Biden campaign. Highly unlikely that he's going to continue in that role. They've got to fill that role. They've got to get a strategy together very, very quickly. So she's passed the early test. The campaign has not yet been built or tested. It's being tested, but it hasn't been built. Right. And that is a big question in this campaign. How quickly can they gear up and respond to the challenge here? One thing I expect to see is I expect that you're going to see in very short order the super PACs supporting Harris in filling the breach here and hitting the airwaves. which is what super PACs should do in a situation like this.
I want to go back to thoughts and feelings in Trumplandia, but can we just talk about Chicago for a second? Can anything, we feel like she stated that she has the delegates wrapped up. I mean, can anything freaky happen in Chicago at this point? What can we expect in this convention besides the theatrics and the storytelling that was alluded to earlier? What are some flags? I mean, I guess I'm going back to the unknown unknowns, as it were.
Well, I mean, there's always been a concern about protests and so on. You have to wonder if those are going to be as pronounced if with the president not on the ballot. I mean, the 68 convention was not a great example that protests go away with the man, but that was a completely different situation. So, I'm still keeping an eye on that, but wondering if those are going to be quite the same. And the thing about unknowns, whether known or not, is there's an element of, I mean, unknown is unknown. So, but that's the main, I think what happens on the street in the hall. And then it's just a matter to me of, do they have a coherent message, and is it delivered well, and does every speaker augment and reflect it? And then how does she perform? How does the VP perform? And do you leave Chicago with a clear message a clear message and a clear sense of who Kamala Harris is in a positive terms, a clear sense of the VP, but particularly who Harris is, so that she is a fully formed person in the minds of voters who watch, and everybody who watches gets what the campaign is about. I mean, that would be a successful convention.
Yeah, and Jen, I mean, the political reporter in me, and I'm sure maybe even in you, I won't speak for you, but there was this moment where we thought, wow, we're finally going to get to cover a contested convention. It can happen. This is going to be and obviously it will not. So I don't expect there to be anything going on from that sense. But to David's point about, what's going to come from this convention, and one thing where I really do think that Trump's speech on the last day, besides it gets panned for being too long and kind of meandering into Trumpisms, but to me, where it really fell short and gave Harris and Democrats an opening is that it was not future forward, right? It didn't talk about, here's what's going to happen. If I'm president, here are the things that are going to be better for you. Here's how you are going to, this is how prices at the grocery store are going to go down. Here's why you're going to feel better about your neighborhood. Here's why you're going to feel that, the border is going to be secure and you don't have to worry about that with me, or why the world's going to feel safer. And, a lot of that speech was, there was, the lines he loves using about the election was taken from him and stolen from him, and how terrible the Democrats are and how they've made things worse, but not a lot of, here's how I'm gonna make it better. Right. So I do think that Harris, beyond making the case against Trump, and obviously that's going to be a centerpiece of the convention, has to make a positive case for not just herself, but like, what is the next 4 years going to look like? And Biden had so much trouble doing that, in part because whether it was, I go back to the message and the messenger, regardless of what his message was, people looked at him and said, I don't think he's going to make it.
He didn't look like the future.
We're not going back. That you heard the "we're not going back" thing in Milwaukee. I wonder if we're gonna, that with the crowd seemed to start that, but I wonder if we'll start to see that. But you've taken us back to Mar-a-Lago. Let's stay there for a second. Tony Fabrizio, as you alluded to, David, last week when we were all in the RNC together, he made it very clear they anticipated this, that they were ready for Senator Harris to be at the top of the ticket, that they had already gotten ads together and things together. So, but at the same time, we saw a bit of And we saw Stephen Miller on TV, many other surrogates, a bit of a minor freak out. There's some buzz, who knows how serious it is, about buyer's remorse on JD Vance at the bottom of their ticket. What's going on in Trumplandia? What is your sense of, and what can you say more that you alluded to, both of you, about what you expect in terms of response?
I don't think they wanted this. I mean, I think Tony, there was a bit of bravado about it, and I'm sure that in some ways they'd rather have her than someone else. They may learn to regret that. And I'll tell you one reason they may learn to regret it. And I alluded to this earlier. Kamala Harris has been swimming in the deep end of the pool for 4 years. She almost drowned, but she learned how to swim. And she's a far more confident and commanding candidate than she would have been, than she was 4 years ago, than she would have been 2 years ago. That's something that you can't teach. And I think that they probably were surprised at the composure and the command that she showed right out of the box, both in terms of putting this together and the way she's appeared in front of the camera. You know, I think that they believe she has vulnerabilities, and you know what the Republicans do best is try and paint people way far out of the mainstream. And that's what they're going to try and do. The problem they have is that they're kind of way far out of the mainstream too. And so if it becomes a battle of like who's extreme, you know, there's plenty of fodder to fire back with. But you know, so I think what's going on there is concern. Last week they had no race. This week they have a race, and they have a new candidate who, if she defines herself well and can win the battle of definition, you know, they know that Donald Trump's not a popular candidate. They know that he's vulnerable. His numbers are better today than they've ever been, but they're still underwater, and he still has vulnerabilities. And so they know there's a race. In terms of Vance, I'm not at all convinced that had they had this race last week, that J.D. Vance would be the vice presidential candidate. That was a luxury that, you know, his sons and the Silicon Valley guys and Tucker Carlson were very much interested in J.D. Vance, and they sold Trump on the idea that, you know, his insurance policy to continue the franchise past 2028. And but, you know, you just saw in the last 24 hours tape surface of him attacking Kamala Harris for being childless. You know, I think that, and he's been underwhelming in his first appearances, you know. The question is, can he swim? And I think that's a very, very open question.
Amy?
Talking about JD Vance, the JD Vance piece. Yeah, I mean, I guess the real question about would they have picked somebody else comes to me to, all right, well, would it have been then somebody who can undercut Harris's appeal and or reach into parts of the electorate that Trump is just seems not interested in winning back, namely those like suburban voters, especially suburban women voters. So maybe Marco Rubio, I guess, of all the people that were on the list. I mean, the one that made from strategic sense would have been to put Nikki Haley on the ticket as the VP if you knew that Harris was your opponent. Though I just really could not see Trump being comfortable with that. What do I know? Right? Yeah. But like, is he really going to do that? Would he really have had another choice? So, and I do think the one thing about Vance, and yeah, it's been sort of underwhelming. This is his first big talk about the deep end. I mean, you know, he had a Senate race. It wasn't a particularly impressive first run, but you know, we've seen plenty of candidates who you know, they don't have a great first run, but in their reelection or in other opportunities they get, they sort of rise to the occasion. But he still does his Midwest bona fides, and this is what Fabrizio talked to us about in Milwaukee. was the fact that they can just plop him in the Midwest for the entire rest of this summer and fall. Put him in every small town, medium-sized town, put him in Scranton, put him in Erie, just plop him there the whole time and keep that contrast with Harris going, especially among those voters who maybe they showed up for Biden in 2020, but they're skeptical about Harris this time around.
Okay, we're going to go to questions soon. There's down ballot races that are super important. Let's talk about the impact there. How's another predisposed notions that are out the window maybe a bit, or at least certainly have changed.
Yeah, so my colleague Erin Covey just wrote a great piece on the Cook Political Report site about impact on down ballot House races. And look, when we were in Milwaukee and talking with Tony Fabrizio, you know, he was boasting about how wide the Electoral College map had gotten. It wasn't just Virginia, but they were talking about New Jersey and New Mexico, maybe even Maine, right? These blue states that were now suddenly in play. And the same thing was going on when you would talk to Republicans who are on the House side about how big the map could potentially get. First, it was putting seats that should be safer for Democrats in play, but more important, it was taking the lack of enthusiasm among the base was taking some of those, I'm not going to call them layups, but easier opportunities for Democrats to win over some Republican districts in places like New York and California and Oregon. It was just making it harder. So if Biden is struggling to get the base to turn out, then those districts that he carried by 10, 12 points in 2020, well, maybe now he only wins by a couple of points. That makes it much harder for Democrats to get even that low-hanging fruit that they were expecting to get, and really hard to defend the tougher seats that they have to defend in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania. Now I think we kind of go back to scratch, which is if you assume then that turnout comes back in New York and California, Oregon, those sorts of places, Democrats still have great opportunities there. Things aren't much better for them in Ohio, and Pennsylvania is still going to be a battle. And, they do have more vulnerable seats to defend than Republicans, just in terms of just the overall map. So I think it goes from for down ballot House, where it really was what most people, I think, were concerned about on the Democratic side, because the Senate map is already so difficult. It was the worry among Democrats that, oh my gosh, now the last sort of opportunity for Democrats to sort of hold the line in Washington is also gone. We still give a slight advantage to Republicans, given the seats that are in play this year. But before this switch, I think you could argue that it was more than just a slighter advantage.
Okay.
Wait, well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just want to let everyone know we're going to go to questions after David responds to this. Check the chat if you would like to ask your question on the screen, please. Go ahead,
Yeah,
David.
I mean, Kamala Harris in the first 48 hours is gaining among the Democratic base. So I agree with Amy that to the extent that having an engaged Democratic base is helpful, that's important. But in these swing districts and states, it's helpful but not sufficient.
Right.
And so what they really need her to do is do better among constituencies that she still has to do better among. CNN poll this morning had her at 39% among white voters. She got Biden got 41 last time. She needs to grow some. She needs to grow with, moderates and independents, white moderates and independents, in order to be competitive with Trump. And if she becomes competitive, the more competitive she becomes with Trump, the more it changes the picture in these states, swing states and swing districts.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and move to some of the questions now. We have James Martucci from the Harris School of Public Policy, class of 2025. He says, obviously the presidential race is the most important political event happening this year. It seems like Democrats in swing states are going to have more confidence. Most of the folks are running far ahead of Biden. Will their support impact the presidential race?
Yeah, in other words, does the reverse happen, and do the down ballot races have coattails? Well, I don't know. Last time I put a coat on, I don't think that's the way it works generally. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but I don't know if that works. It generally doesn't work that way. You know, if you look at, like, I think the stat is like 68 of the last 69 Senate races in contested contests in a presidential year have gone the same way as the candidate on the ballot. So I think again, they really need, and this is why you saw the congressional leaders coalesce around the idea of changing candidates. They need the top of the ticket to do sufficiently well in order for them to survive. You can run a few points ahead of the ticket, but you can't run, 10, 12, 14 points ahead of the ticket and expect to win these races. So I think they're counting. I don't think that they're going to drag the presidential candidate across the line. They need the presidential candidate to revive party's chances so that they can cross the finish line. That's just, I'm eager to hear what Amy has to say about that.
I 100% agree with that. The one place that I'm very curious about, and the one when we talk about other things on the ballot, is something like Arizona, where you have an abortion ballot initiative.
Yeah, absolutely.
And KFF actually did some polling. Again, this is all in the before times. So this was a few weeks ago, but they looked at polling in Arizona, or they did polling in Arizona. And what they found was that, look, as we would expect, there are going to be a whole lot of people in Arizona who vote for Donald Trump and vote for basically a pro-choice ballot initiative. There are a lot of pro-choice Trump voters. But what they found, it did help for Biden, and again, this is for Biden because we know he had a base problem, but what we found was, or what they found was, those folks who were not particularly interested in voting for Biden, they turned out because they were interested in voting for the ballot initiative. They were going to go down the ticket and vote for Biden, right? It's kind of like, once you get somebody to Target, they're going to buy stuff, right? Like, I came to Target just to buy soap, and then you leave with a whole cart full of things. Now, I don't know if Democrats, though, to the point that both David and I have been making, if that's enough, though, to get those swing voters. In other words, I think where the ballot initiative was helpful in lifting Biden was bringing people who were sitting on the couch because they weren't excited about Biden. Now it's, what about those pro-choice Trump voters, or what about those independent pro-choice voters who really, they don't necessarily like Trump, but they're really not sold on this whole Harris idea. And that, I don't think anybody other than the presidential candidate can talk to them about that. Not the Senate candidate, and not whoever's running these ballot initiatives.
Got it.
We should just one postscript. I know we've got other questions. The whole idea of turnout and turnout operations they're the field goal team of the game. The candidate has to get far enough down the field so that you can kick a field goal. So if Kamala Harris gets within range, for example, in Arizona, of Trump, the additional turnout that comes because of the choice initiative may make the difference in that race.
Yeah.
If she doesn't get down the field, then she may do better than she would have, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's going to win.
Here's a question from Ben Miller, a student at college. We know that the left-leaning side of the Democratic Party has felt underrepresented at the national level within their party. Do you think that there's a negative impact of Harris's past affiliation with law enforcement, lowering turnout and voter enthusiasm from the younger activists in the party?
The Trump people think that they're talking about running, you know, doing digital to younger voters, hitting her from the left on her prosecutorial record. My advice to the which is completely antithetical to their messaging to the broader public. My recommendation to the Harris folks, if they were on this Zoom, would be not to worry about that. I think that it actually helps her to, I mean, right now the game is she a mainstream Democrat or is she a left-wing Democrat? And I think her work as a prosecutor is a certification of sort of mainstream. And remember, we're in a different place than we were in 2020. I think she made a mistake in that race by running away from, she never talked about being a prosecutor. And, you know, and last thing I'd say on this is, and, you know, I have some experience in this. I think that I would never be talking about the historic nature of my candidacy if I were her, but the fact that she is a Black woman gives her a lot of running room here. And I think that I would, you know, I would lean into my sort of mainstream credentials. And, you know, I think that the Democrats are going to stick with Kamala Harris. And I think young Democrats, people of color and so on, who are, you know, inclined are going to be there. One thing in the CNN poll is that last time they polled, Trump was getting 23% of African Americans, and in the poll against Harris, he was getting 15%. So that's one element of their strategy that may be shot to hell, you know.
This is from Jack Kelly from Wisconsin Watch. Jack asks, at her rally in Milwaukee yesterday, Harris offered a clear and concise outline for both the case against Trump and 4 former years of a Democrat in the White House. Whether it lands with voters is another question. Democrats struggled to do that at rallies I attended earlier in this cycle. How important is it for Harris to dictate the narrative of the election, and what does she need to do to control that narrative?
Yeah, it is absolutely critical. And look, this was why after the debate, you saw so many Democratic office holders, either privately or publicly, come out and say, you know, I think the words that they kept using were, you know, unable to campaign effectively, right? And it was, if this is we've seen some flashes of Joe Biden doing well, like at the State of the Union, but it is so inconsistent. And obviously the debate really cemented this sense that he's just not going to be able to deliver the message. But as I said earlier, I think Harris can deliver the message. Whether she's taken seriously as a messenger is what these next few weeks are going to be about. Well, and the entire campaign is actually going to be about. And, you know, going to the previous point and the previous question as well, you know, you saw early on some of the Republicans in Congress were calling her the DEI candidate. And almost immediately, the higher ups in the Republican Party were like, whoa, we don't need that, because that is only helping to really energize voters of color against Republicans for Harris. This idea that, well, you know, if you're a person of color in this country and you get ahead, it's really not because of you and your skills. It's only because you were put there as part of a quota. Instead, so they can also really pivot to, this is not this is not somebody who comes into the race like, say, a brand new candidate without a record, right? I mean, there is still when you talk to voters, what they want to hear about is who's going to fix the economy. And the Harris campaign has to have an answer for that. And the Trump campaign, obviously, they're leading on that question, in part because of nostalgia that voters have about, like, well, when Trump was president, we didn't have inflation. He's a business guy. He understands the economy. Sure, let's go back and, get things back on track. It's you started to hear parts of this, I think, in Milwaukee, and you'll hear it on the campaign trail. I think the other message beyond just the, sort of messages we heard in 2020 about Trump and his temperament and the chaos is, who is he looking out for? Regular people, or, his rich buddies in Silicon Valley and, rich corporate interests. That's the case that she has to effectively prosecute, I think.
Here's a question from Kate Davis in the college. David, can you take this? What do you make of Republicans' growing attacks surrounding Democratic leadership unilaterally selecting the presidential nominee instead of allowing for a more democratic process at the convention? Do you think that argument is one that will resonate significantly with key undecided or independent voters?
No, I mean, I think that I find it almost laughable, because all of a sudden they're worried about the results of a free and fair election being overturned. That's like not ground I'd be arguing if I were them. I don't think that's their firmest argument. They're a little suspect in this regard. I don't think that, you look at polling, and overwhelming numbers of Americans approve of Biden's decision to step off the ticket. So I think it's too cute by half. And there's sort of righteous indignation about the fact that voters weren't being respected. Just doesn't, I mean, maybe I'm bringing my own prejudice to this. It just doesn't, to me, it doesn't resonate. I think they're going to quickly move off of that. I think that they'll stick with it to the extent that they want to kind of throw a wrench in a monkey wrench in the works. So they'll sue about whether she's entitled to the money, and they'll maybe try and create ballot issues if they can. I think most of that will be taken care of when the delegates choose the candidates by August 7th. But I think they're going to move on to the sort of very conventional Republican attacks, trying to paint her out of the mainstream, paint her too far left. And I don't think the manner in which she was selected, it'll be very clear after the convention that she's the choice of the Democratic Party, and I think people will move on.
Linda Hardy, also from New Chicago. As a Black woman, I wondered if you both think undecideds and moderates would be willing to vote for a woman, and in particular, a Black woman, for president.
Well, David, you have a lot of experience working with candidates that are brand new to voters. Curious your take.
I think it's an open question. We've never elected a woman president. We have elected a Black president. It's interesting to me, like the initial reaction, it shows the progress that we've made, because I don't think the focus was as much on that as on her as a candidate and what she was saying and what she was doing. The only people I hear talking about it are, some right-wing members of Congress who, pushing this DEI thing, which I think is less and less effective the better she does out on the stump. She looks like a perfectly commanding candidate right now, so that kind of erodes that argument. And then there are well-meaning Democrats. I was on TV this morning following a venerable female member of Congress who was just saying, I just can't wait to vote for the first Black woman and everything. And I thought, and I said at the time, I can't think of a less helpful argument to be making right now. The best argument for Kamala Harris is that she'd be a better president, and this is why, and this is how it affects you, and this is what the benefits are to you of electing Kamala Harris. I thought in 2016 that so much emphasis was placed on Hillary Clinton's status as the first woman that it actually hurt her. You know, the whole "I'm with her" campaign that they ran. It's like, what about me? Is what if I'm a voter? You know, how does this affect me? So I think this is untested as to whether there's so much resistance that you can't elect a woman. But I'm sort of guardedly optimistic that that's not going to be the obstacle for her. We'll see.
That's interesting you bring that up, because I saw that Hillary Clinton has an op-ed that went up pretty recently in the New York Times. I don't get a chance to see it yet, where she suggests that she didn't lean into saying I'd be the first woman as much as she might have or would have, and was suggesting that Kamala Harris should do that. There's our last question before we wrap is from Ginny Hall. She wants to know what you both think. Would Mark Kelly's votes against pro-labor bills be a problem with labor voters, or will the Biden administration pro-labor actions carry Harris?
So the one thing about Kelly that I think is a liability. Look, none of these VP, we talked about all of the pros for these VP picks. All of them come with baggage. You're an elected official. You're going to have baggage. To me, it is the fact that he's a senator and not a governor, right? So he is part of Washington. He is not, you know, one of those executives who gets to make decisions and be outside of the swamp. And, you know, he also is tied to the Biden-Harris record as much as Harris is tied to the Biden-Harris record. So that's one. Look, you know, this idea about, you know, will, say, a Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly alienate progressives, whether it's votes on labor or views on Israel, is a fine argument to make. But I would just echo David's point that the challenge that Democrats have right now is not, can they keep their progressives happy and turned out? It's, can they win over voters in the middle? And so if, you know, if labor says, wow, these votes are untenable, we can't endorse the Harris ticket, that's fine. I would say that it would not have much of it would not have as much as an impact as it would be politically for Harris to be labeled as too left, too out of touch, for your sort of median voter.
I'd only point out that labor may not like every vote that Mark Kelly has cast, but they sure as hell supported him when he ran for re-election. And I think that everybody understands the consequences of the you know, the stakes in this election, and it feels like they're all in for Harris, and I don't think they're going to make any decision based on who her VP is, but voters might, and in a positive way, if she picks someone who is reassuring that she's not, you know, so far out of the, you know, sort of the center left that they can't abide her. I'm not worried about Kelly. And, you know, in terms of one thing about Amy, what Amy said, he isn't a governor, but Donald Trump wasn't an elected official at all. Trump got the benefit of being I think the illusion that he was the, you know, that he ran this far-flung empire, and that you know, made him qualified for president. Kelly may not have made executive decisions of those sorts, but when you're a fighter pilot, when you're an astronaut and so on, you got to make some pretty significant decisions. And I think that he may get a certain, you know, and I'm not even sure who the right candidate should be, but and I do think there's value being a governor. That used to be like the coin of the realm in national politics.
Yeah.
But you know, now you've got to be a reality TV star. But I think that Kelly's got a lot of attributes that if she picks him, would redound to her benefit.
Oh, I think you're on mute.
As captain of the Zoom, I realize that our time is up, so thank you so much to both Amy and David for joining us today. Thank you to our audience. The recording of this event will be posted on the Cook Political Report and the IOP YouTube channels. And for those of you who are coming to Chicago, we look forward to seeing you here with many more U Chicago IOP events. Bye, everybody.
Bye.